Greetings from Canova, West Virginia, here in Wayne County. While here, we'll see towns such as Wayne, Canova, and Cerrito. We will also speak with Robert Thompson, a local teacher and book author, and June Ashworth, a columnist for the Wayne County News and local historian. And they'll both give us a detailed account of Wayne County's history, culture, and area attractions.
Wayne County is located at the westernmost point of West Virginia, and it's located on the western boundary. It's bordered by the Big Sandy River, which starts in southwestern Virginia. So, not surprisingly, a lot of the early families and settlers came out of that portion of the state. My family, and families in particular, started in Russell County, Virginia, and it's really surprising how many people from Wayne County, how many of their ancestors originated in Russell County, Virginia. And my Thompson family, of course, they traveled across the mountains and came down the Russell Fork River, Leviza Fork, and that brings them out right at Fort Gay, which is, was really one of the first gateways into Wayne County. That was really the first area settled in the late 1790s. The Short family, which originated in Russell County, they are credited with being the first settlers in Wayne County. And Samuel Short settled at where Fort Gay is today and established his farm. He was actually one of the first slave owners. After he was able to develop his farm, he acquired slaves. The Big Sandy River, not only at Fort Gay, but also the Tug Fork and downstream to Virginia Point, where present-day Canova was really the first area of Wayne County that was settled. Many of the early prominent families that came in settled along the Big Sandy River. And the first communities, Fort Gay really was one of the first villages, one of the first towns in the county. It was, like I said, first settled in the 1790s, but it quickly became one of the most important business spots on the Big Sandy River and in the county. When they were discussing forming Wayne County, they actually initially wanted to put the people along the Big Sandy River wanted to start a county seat and a new town at Fort Gay. It didn't work out for them at that time, but it did lead to a new town called Cassville, which later became Fort Gay. So the Big Sandy River was really very important to the early history. Of course, it was inhabited by Indians. A lot of mound builders lived in that area. There were many mounds along the river. It was a major Indian trail during the frontier period. The Indians from Ohio would travel up the Big Sandy River to strike settlements in southwestern Virginia. So it was supposedly the last river in Kentucky or Virginia to be settled, and so that was mainly due to Indian threats.
Well, Wayne became the county seat when the General Assembly, Virginia General Assembly, separated Wayne from Cabell County in 1842, and January the 18th, 1842, and that was a result of a petition from the men in the southern end of the county. About 59 men had signed a petition wanting to establish a new county. Frederick Moore was very important in that. He owned land in Kentucky and at Fort Gay, which was Cassville at the time. And when the General Assembly established Wayne County, they established the home of Abraham Trout on the top of the hill, which is now called Wayne. It was called Fairview, and Fairview is a name that has cemeteries all the way across the United States. I've visited many that came from Fairview, Wayne County. There's a Fairview in Williamson. There's a Fairview in Canesville, Missouri, that was named from people that went from Wayne County. And in Missouri, in Holden, Missouri, there's a Fairview that the family left here. And but Trout's Hill became Fairview and then Wayne, and it was named for Matt Anthony Wayne, who was the won the battle from the Indians of the Battle of Fallen Timbers. Many of the towns in Wayne County became town names as a result of the railroad. Dunlow, Ardale, Genoa.
Well, East Lynn, it started out as a little village called Twin Creek, basically like a farming village, and then it became known as Atkins Mill in the 1880s, 1870s, 1880s, because the Atkins family had a grist mill there, and that's where the post office was located. In the early 1890s, the name East Lynn was developed, and the first record that I've seen for that name was for the East Lynn Mining and Manufacturing Company. And at that time, the railroad didn't go through there. There was rumors that the N&W Railroad would extend up through there. So my belief is they kind of wanted to modernize the town, the name of it a little bit, to try to maybe entice the railroad to come that way. But it wasn't until 10 years later that the railroad actually came through and really started off the coal industry and the railroad industry. So.
The Lavalette received its name from the fact that Joseph Miller's daughter was named Lavalette, and when the railroad went through, that's what they named Lavalette. Dingus was named for Peter Dingus. Crum was named for the Crum family that settled there. Adam Crum was a Revolutionary War soldier, and many, many descendants. So that's how Crum received it. Cerrito is a abolitionist town developed by Eli Thayer, a New England abolitionist who wanted to prove to this area that you could operate without slavery. And so he brought many people from New England. A lot of them returned when the Civil War, that was about 1859, 1860, and then the Civil War came along and a lot of them went back home. Some of them bought land but never even came. And but the Horde family stayed, and he actually picked up where Thayer left off. Canova was going to be Morgan. The Morgan family owned it, and it was going to be Morganza. And that didn't work out, and the railroad actually helped to develop the town of Canova. At one time, in the 1920s, the people in Cerrito, Canova determined that they had more population in the county, and they wanted the county seat. And there was a big battle. Many people wrote letters to the editor, but the vote, particularly by the southern end of the county, kept the courthouse at Wayne.
And resulted in quite a few fires as well
Right.
during that time. The courthouse burned, several buildings in Wayne burned mysteriously during that time period.
One of the most important families, I guess, that lived at Wayne was the Samuel Ferguson family, and they came from Tazewell, Virginia. They were here by 1801. Samuel owned a store, which was at the forks of 12 Pole, just on the other side of Wayne, and he took oxen. He ordered goods from Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, and they came down the river, and he actually sent an ox cart over to Pritchard on the Big Sandy River and picked it up and brought it back to his store. Many people in that time, in order to get material, food supplies that weren't available here, went to Cincinnati on the river. And then they were brought to Pritchard or brought to Cerrito, Canova. He brought his daughter, Elizabeth, who married Charles Booth, and Samuel Ferguson lived on one side of 12 Pole at Wayne, and Charles Booth lived on the other side. Charles lived in the section known as Newtown today, and he was actually buried about where the Johnson Funeral Home sits, and a flood washed the cemetery away. And Charles Booth started a large family. His family came from Pennsylvania. They were Quakers. His dad was also named Charles, and he didn't marry another Quaker, and they kicked him out of the family. Of course, the Adkins family in the Beach Fork area. After the Civil War, there was the Adkins family split down the middle. Some of them did not go with the South, as most of them did. And so after the Civil War, there was still rife among the Adkins family, and a whole group of them moved to Minnesota. When Wayne County was split, a man by the name of Hiram Chadwick was on the Cabell County Commission, and so he was one that was appointed to be one of the first commissioners in Wayne County. And that is really our court, was really the court system. Commissioners at that time was really the court system. And his dad, John Chadwick, was a Revolutionary War soldier and was buried where the Ashland Oil tank farm is, just across the Big Sandy River. And when Ashland Oil needed that, they moved all of those graves over to the Catlettsburg Cemetery.
The Napper family, Thomas Franklin Napper, was supposedly the first educator in Wayne County. Arrived in the early 1800s. He's buried on Napper's Ridge, kind of between Genoa and East Lynn. But he was one of the first teachers in Wayne County. Served in the War of 1812. Of course, Napper's a very prominent name in Wayne County today, and as far as I know, all those Nappers are descended from Thomas.
Almost every district in Wayne County he had taught in at one time, and is credited. He and Charles Walker Ferguson are credited with basically setting up the educational system in Wayne County. Aunt Mandy Osborn was a very important person in the town of Wayne. She lived to be 97. She was born in Chesterfield County, Virginia, and she was married 3 times. She first married Joseph Jefferson Mansfield, who was a lawyer, prominent lawyer in Wayne, and he got killed at the very beginning of the Civil War. And then she married Harrison Walker, and he was a physician in the Civil War in the 16th Virginia Cavalry, and resigned, came home, and his wife had died, and so he was trying to help Amanda settle Joseph Jefferson's estate, and they married. He had children by her, 2 children by her, and then after his death in 1869, she married Edmund Osborn. And after his death, she had married a lawyer, a doctor, and Edmund Osborn was a minister. So she had quite an interesting life, and everyone in the town of Wayne knew Aunt Mandy Osborn. She had a boarding house for a while, and just
anytime something important was going on, like when you talked about earlier when they were wanting to move the courthouse to Cerrito or Canova, anytime something important like that happened, they would go interview her, the Wayne News would, just to see what she thought about it. Of course, she had almost a century of experience, so they would get her opinion on it. And in particular, she didn't want the courthouse moved. She said that it had always been there, and she just felt that it should stay where it was. That was her opinion on it.
She had a very prominent family. She had a son that became a congressman, and Joseph Jefferson Mansfield Jr. became a congressman in the state of Texas.
And Colonel Ferguson, he was probably the most prominent Confederate officer from Wayne County. He attended Marshall Academy when he was 17 years old. Many prominent young men of that time did. And after he obtained his law license, he probably just read law. He didn't attend law school or anything like that. He just apprenticed under another lawyer. And so he became basically a country lawyer in the town of Wayne. And he did that for several years. And in the late 1850s, he was appointed colonel of the county militia. And at that time, there wasn't a whole lot of action for the county militia. They met every so often to muster and do a little bit of military drill practice. Of course, they didn't even have weapons. Usually, they just used sticks or something. And so it didn't really seem like that much or that big of a responsibility. But just 4 years later, when the Civil War started, all of a sudden it was a very important responsibility. When the Union Army invaded Cabell County, Wyandotte, and Barbersville, the people of Barbersville called on Colonel Ferguson and the Wayne County Militia to protect the town. And Ferguson led the Wayne County Militia. There was about 300, supposedly. Of course, they didn't have uniforms. They were just in their farming clothes, and they had all different kinds of weapons, shotguns, pistols, flintlock muskets, and they all gathered at the Mud River Bridge in Barbersville. The Union Army, the Union forces that were attacking the town were from Kentucky, and Ferguson's men were overlooking the bridge. So when the Kentuckians started across the bridge, Ferguson ordered them to open fire, and they did. They killed 4 or 5 of the Union men. Of course, the Union soldiers were fairly well trained. Ferguson's men were not trained at all. And when the Union soldiers started up the hill with their bayonets, the Wayne County men just turned around and ran, basically. And Ferguson eventually, he continued on to Scary Creek in Putnam County. He was at that battle. He wrote that he helped carry wounded soldiers from the field. Soon after that, he was captured in Cerrito and sent to prison at Camp Chase. He, after about 6 months, he was freed, returned home, started the 16th Virginia Cavalry, which was probably the largest Confederate regiment in the area. They served at very important battles throughout the Civil War. Ferguson and his 16th Virginia Cavalry were part of Jenkins' brigade, General Albert Gallatin Jenkins. And Ferguson he and Jenkins were very good friends, apparently. I figure they probably knew each other before the war, since they were both politicians, they were both lawyers. And Ferguson was Jenkins' second in command. And during the Battle of Gettysburg, Jenkins was severely wounded, and Ferguson took over command of the brigade and led it on the second day during the cavalry battle at Gettysburg. And all the other Confederate officers were thrilled that Ferguson was in charge. There's numerous references that said he was a better field commander than Jenkins. And he continued to lead the brigade until Jenkins returned to action. Ferguson was eventually sent, in the winter of 1863, he was sent back into Wayne County to raid and purchase goods from eastern Kentucky to send south to the Confederacy. And during that, he made all the Union garrisons around furious. They would strike out and attack Guyandotte, Barbersville over in eastern Kentucky. And the Union Army sent numerous raids into Wayne County trying to capture him and his men. Finally, they caught up with him at Murder Hollow. Well, it wasn't called that at the time, but it was on Lick Creek, south of present-day East Lynn. The Union soldiers from Kentucky surrounded his camp at dawn. They yelled out a warning, and at that point, the rebels ran for their guns. So they opened fire and killed about 10 rebels. They captured Ferguson and the rest of his men. He was sent back to Camp Chase, eventually to Fort Delaware. And while he was at Fort Delaware, the Union Army came up with a plan. There were Union soldiers under friendly fire in Charleston, South Carolina. So the Union Army decided that they would send Confederate officers south and put them under friendly fire as well to try to stop the friendly fire against Union soldiers. And Ferguson was unlucky enough to be selected for that duty. He was sent to South Carolina, placed on a prison ship off the coast of South Carolina, and he actually spent 5 weeks on that prison ship. Of course, the story is they had to eat rats. It was constantly a coal stove going. This was in the middle of summer, so it was horrible, horrible conditions. Eventually, he was free, made his way back, served throughout the rest of the war. He did not surrender until about a month after the war actually came to an end. He wasn't welcome in Wayne County anymore because Union officials had been installed in the county. So he had to go over to Louisa, Kentucky, where he lived the rest of his life, and he was actually able to help get the railroad through. And he died at just 48 years old. So he was a very young man, but was able to accomplish a huge amount for such a young man.
One of the important people in the town of Wayne was Taylor McClure. And he had the Oakview Academy, and it was where the prestigious men went, and men and women went. It was on the hill, just as you go in. And anybody who was anybody went to Oakview Academy.
It competed with Marshall. It competed with Marshall.
Yes, it did. It did. And some of the most important men to come out of Wayne County were graduates of that. He had music, he had the training, he taught etiquette, he taught all of the basic subjects that anybody would want, and it was a tremendous asset to the county.
And the town of Cerrito tried numerous times to get him to move that school to Cerrito, which he never would. And there was numerous references to people that they said they could get free education in Marshall. I guess there were grants or something at that time that people could go to Marshall for free, but people would choose to go to McClure's Oakview Academy and pay to go to. Many people from Wayne County have influenced surrounding towns. When I published my first book on East Lynn, I was surprised at how many people from Columbus and Huntington. I probably sold more books in Huntington than I have anywhere else on East Lynn, and you wouldn't really think that just initially, but there's so many families that originated in East Lynn or Wayne or wherever that moved to Huntington, and then eventually as work dried up in Huntington, they moved to Cleveland and Columbus and other northern cities.
There's a street in Wayne called Cleveland Street, and that was because that was the way people got out of town to go to Cleveland. They went to Akron to the match factories and to the tire manufacturers. They went to Cleveland for the steel mills, and they went to Detroit to work in the car manufacturer.
I have as many relatives and cousins in Rittman and Akron area as I do in Wayne County. My grandfather in the early 1950s, when he, I think he was 17, he moved to Rittman, Ohio, worked in the box board factory out there, the match factory, worked at a steel mill in Cleveland. He and all of his brothers, I believe, worked out there. He came home, and one of his brothers stayed out there, so we go out there every so often to visit family. I have as many cousins out there as I do here.
You go to the Rittman Cemetery, and it's like looking at a Wayne County cemetery. All of the names, the Crabtrees, the Thompsons, you can just look at the cemetery and see. And I've done several newspaper articles regarding that cemetery.
And you talk to people, you'll say, well, I'm from Wayne County, and say, well, yeah, my dad was from Wayne County. And pretty much everybody you talk to really out there has some relative that lives in Wayne County.
The early logging industry, Wayne County was timbered early on, and the logging industry, they put all of the logs on the creek bank of 12 Pole, and when the spring floods came, they washed to Catlettsburg, and they were all branded. So when they got to Catlettsburg, the salesmen were there from Cincinnati, and if they were going to be shipped to Pittsburgh, salesmen were there to purchase the logs. It was a big, big industry, the timbering industry.
Another thing about the logging industry, especially at Cerrito, the Millender Mills, many of the logs from 12 Pole ended up at the Millender Mills in Cerrito. That was an absolutely massive place. Covered, I think, 10 acres at one point, employed about 200 men. It was completely self-sufficient. They didn't even have to purchase fuel to operate their steam engines. They just used sawdust and wood shavings from the cutting of the wood to fuel their steam engines. So it was really a model of industry for that time period.
And then, of course, the development of the coal industry in the East Lynn area, and the railroad went to East Lynn for that very purpose. Many, many years later, when they wanted to disband, and they actually, for a number of years, no trains went to East Lynn. In the early 70s, Columbia Gas actually gave the N&W $10 million to upgrade the road, the railroad track to East Lynn.
And East Lynn's the only reason that the tracks weren't taken up from Canova through Wayne, Lavalette. It really saved and now, of course, Rock Spring Development's up there, and they send sometimes 2 trains of coal a day out.
But the gas company spent the money. They upgraded their line. They put a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment in the coal mine, and then it became cheaper to mine coal in Colombia and South America, and so they stopped that. And so the railroad line sat empty for years, and then, as Robbie says, we have the new coal mine up there now, and sometimes they're sending out 100 cars a week.
Yeah. Well, I think each train, I've counted several, and I've looked at the statistics. The maximum number of cars they can send out on a single train is 110 cars, and sometimes they'll send out 2 trains a day from that mine. So it's a massive amount of coal that comes out of there.
But the difference in that and the union mines is that the large machinery today have taken place of a lot of the men, so you don't see the workers that the coal mine once employed. And
it hasn't really brought a regrowth to East Lynn either, because back in the early 1900s, people had to live near the mine in order to work there. So East Lynn was a good-sized town, movie theaters, doctors' offices, everything, because people needed those services. Now, I think 70% of the people that work at Rock Spring live in Kentucky. Wayne County is home to several well-known attractions. You have, of course, Beach Fork Lake, Eastland Lake were both formed in the 1960s and 70s for flood control purposes and also recreation. It's still very popular today. You'll see cars from Kentucky, Ohio, with pulling boats and campers and everything else going to these two lakes. So it does draw a lot of business in. I think more time and effort is spent on Beach Fork because it is closer to Huntington. Not as much work is done at East Lynn to develop that lake, even though it is much larger than Beach Fork. Camden Park, which is one of the oldest, it's probably one of the oldest amusement parks in the country, I imagine, still in existence. It's the only one in West Virginia. It's been around since about 1903. It was started as a railroad, or as an electric railway stopover point, basically. And eventually rides were added in, and it's still in existence today. That was always one of the things that you enjoyed as a kid, was going to Camden Park in the summer.
Factories have their employee days at Camden Park.
Hunting and fishing is one of the most popular activities in the county. You have you go ATV riding on the ridges. You can set. My family lives at East Lynn. You can sit on the porch in the summer, and there will be 25, 30 ATVs go up at one time.
Another important aspect is all the families that get together at the cemetery days and family reunions. The Adkins family reunion at one time was the largest family reunion around. They had thousands and thousands of people that came. The
Maynard family reunion today is basically a community event, really. I mean, thousands of people show up. The
Dameron family get together at Cabwaylingo and reserve the entire facility for a weekend. But other families have reunions, and the cemetery reunions used to be every year. You would go, and it was an all-day event. You took your dinner, and there may be 4 preachers during the day. Some of them had everyone that had passed away that year. They had a funeral for all of them. People refer to Outwayne many times, and when the coal mines were declining, the factories were developing in Cabell County. There was work in Cabell County and no work in Wayne County. So the people, automobiles came along, they could get to the factories in Cabell County, and so they came to work. Their hearts are still in Wayne County. They still were farmers, they still had land. And so the people in Huntington brought their dogs and they hunted in Wayne County. Owens, Illinois had their clubhouse in Wayne County. And so people said, well, going out Wayne. Going out Wayne.
I'm guilty of it too. If somebody would ask me, when at Marshall, somebody would ask me where I was from, I said, well, I'm from out Wayne. You know, it just kind of rolls off the tongue. You don't even think about it.
It really developed through the factories.